Hello, and welcome to the beginning of my series, The Two Gardens and the Tree of Life. This, to me, is a really important subject because so much has been focused, so much attention has been focused on the Anunnaki and their garden, where they develop their slaves to mine their gold and all of this, which is true. There's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of big gaps in that story, and I'm really not going to go into that a whole lot because that's a lot. And I don't really want to focus on that. What I'd like to focus on is understanding how these two separate creation stories are both valid on this planet and share the same space in the sense of within our DNA. Because right now, what's being focused on is the Anunnaki story. They're getting all the credit for creating humanity, and that's just not so, not in regard to what I receive from the records of Thoth. So I want to share the whole picture, or the bigger picture. I'm not the whole picture, because that, again, is really more than I have the capacity to put out right now, but the bigger picture. And so we're going to start with the first garden, and that is the true divine creation story. And then we'll go into how the second garden comes into the picture and how it relates in our being and in our DNA. Now, as usual, I really don't have much preparation for this. I'm just sort of winging it like I usually do. I just sort of get into the flow, decide what several things that I'd like to include, and then I let it sort of grow its own garden and see where it takes us, because I feel that there will be some new information coming along as I create this series. So we're going to begin with some information I received back in the 90s, Thoth, on evolution of Earth within multiple realities. This is something that needs to be understood first before we can get into any other part of the picture. So I'm reading to you from this original transmission. Understand that the higher light body of Earth did not become formative as a physical incorporation until the epoch of Eros. And we're going to be going through all these epochs later and understanding really what they are as given to me by Thoth. However, all elementation at that time was still within a higher dimensional realm than it is today. This realm was not yet separate from the greater matrix of its first cause creational being, that state which is the first principle of spiritual impulse in matter. Once humanity, and thus the earth, separated from the inscription of light, which is the sacred geometry of the Adam Kadmon template in the Naidman epoch, the earth entered the Pythagorean epoch, in which it currently resides. It is here that the fracturing of time occurred within the earth's envelope, and so began the overcoming of one reality to be replaced by another. This was not an instantaneous occurrence, but in the seeming eternality of time, it came into being as a flicker upon the celestial sea. With the time tsunami, which destroyed Atlantis, so the final seeds of the creation of the rift had been sown. The old reality of the ancient days of Lemuria and Atlantis, and all that had come before, was now largely replaced by a reality of a more base creational program. At this point, far greater clarification we will call I'm sorry, let me try that again. At this point, for greater clarification, we will call the original reality of Lemuria, Atlantis, and the time before the lotus, the unfolding of the ancient form represented by the lotus flower. The current reality caused by the time tsunami of the sinking of Atlantis we will refer to as the Kali, borrowing its name from the Kali rift of the Earth's time tear. Now, there is an extreme overlap here because actually when humanity came through the lotus and began to go into the true matter world, there's an overlap where Atlantis really kind of was a platform for that overlap. So that needs to be realized when you're looking at this, because the well, I'm going to get into that a little more later. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll just leave it at that for now. In the lotus time, all geophysical changes conformed to the higher template. There was cataclysm, but it was not so detrimental to the civilization of the lotus time, due to the condition of matter and time itself in that period. Yet various alternate realities began to develop as the Earth slid ever further into the fractured realm of the Kali rift. So in other words, there were stages to the lotus reality that sort of started breaking down a little more, and a little more. As the Kali time approached, one of these alternate fractured realities collided with the lotus time, and because this Kali reality was the densest, it gradually replaced the lotus as the most physical reality. The Kali time did have similarities to the latter stages of the lotus, so all in the lotus was not altered, but some major events were. These major events triggered many other events, which of course did not exist in the lotus. As an example, in the original lotus reality, Jesus was not crucified. We are not saying that he survived the crucifixion, but that he was not taken upon the cross at all. However, the event in the Kali in which he was crucified was the last movement of separation from the lotus for humanity and the world. Thus, the crucifixion of Yeshua is the crossover event. That is, it exists in the Kali, but it has also written over an aspect or sub-reality sheath of the lotus. Now, this gets really difficult for our minds to grasp, because by the time Jesus was crucified, you would say, well, the lotus reality was way long gone. But you see, it has effects in other time portions of our existence beyond where the lotus disappeared. When I wrote this, there was no such thing as this Mandela effect that is being talked about so much. This is an actual experience where they call it that because for some people, Nelson Mandela was not, I guess, imprisoned, is it? I'm not exactly sure. I don't know a lot about that particular effect, what they're talking about and why they call it the Mandela effect. But you can look back and say, well, certain things, for those of us of a certain age, this took place. And for younger people and on the web, it did not take place. And so now we're looking at that and we're saying, oh, well, there's things happening now that are changing our time reality. Well, I'm bringing that up even though I don't know a lot about it, because it's related to understanding this whole Yeshua thing, although, you know, that goes back a lot further in time. So let's continue with the transmission here. There are strata in the earth that contain the actual imprints of sudden reality time shifts in the past. While in general, we have said that such shifts took place gradually, there were moments in time when these shifts were sudden. This is measured in certain strata of the earth, And in the near future, there will be scientists who will puzzle over these imprints, although even then they will not recognize them for what they truly are. And this is happening now in the 21st century, especially in the last, let's say, 10 years. They're finding, nails and things in these strata, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, it can't be there. Well, this is, for the most part, the reason for it. There are instances where there were beings that came to the planet millions of years ago and they left an imprint. But for the most part, it has to do with what he's saying here. There are strata in the earth that contain the actual imprints of sudden reality time shifts in the past. While in general we have said that such shifts took place gradually, there were moments in time where these shifts were sudden. This is measured in certain strata of the earth, and in the near future there will be scientists who will puzzle over these imprints, although even then they will not recognize them for what they truly are. And this has happened. For one thing, the strata which evidences these time reality shifts are millions of years old. The actual shifts took place only thousands of years ago from the perspective of the lotus reality. The geologic strata that contains the imprinting, however, is in the Kali reality. Only now are levels of the greater Akashic being opened on Earth to reveal the nature of time and reality in this world. It was not possible for this planet's incarnate souls to access it even 20 years ago. In the future, so the supra-Akashic will become accessible, which is now closed to the humanity of this sphere. Now, we don't have the supra-Akashic open to us yet, but we're on the fringes of it. And so we're getting little pinhole peeks at it, so to speak, because the supra-Akashic holds much more of true awareness than we have in the higher Akashic now. The three realities, the three alternate streams of Earth reality referred to above, Thoth calls the three millenniums, although they are not in the context associated with 100-year periods. And this is very confusing. As I said in a recent video, I wish I had changed that right away. I wish I'd gone to Thoth and said, look, can we use another term? And I probably would have gotten one, but I didn't. So it's set in my Akashic material, so I'm not going to try to change it now. But these millenniums he's referring to really don't have anything to do with time itself in regard to measuring time. So, excuse me. So the first millennium was before the Kali Rift. The second millennium is after the Kali Rift. That's what we're in now. And the third millennium, integration of first and second millenniums into new dynamic template of consciousness for human Earth reality. That is the New Earth Star era. Probably not just that. I would say the third millennium starts taking effect when we enter the Pyramidus Radius matrix more fully. But that's the whole sweep of it that goes from that into the New Earth Star. And so that concludes the reading of this particular transmission from Thoth that was given to me probably around 1998 or something like that. So now we're on my Spirit Mythos, the old archive site, which I really don't put anything new to. It's just the old stuff. And I'm going to read you this. Various creation stories have been told through the sacred forms of ancient cultures. In more recent times, the creational mythos has been accessed via channeled receipt as given by specific beings or directly from diverse levels of the Akashic records of the earth. What is presented here is an encapsulation of Thoth's version of the earth's creation. In the telling of a story so vast and beyond the pale of present human experience, of necessity, the knowledge is brought forth a great deal through brought forth through a great deal of mythos or symbology and archetypal representation, yet the essence revealed is nevertheless at one with the unfoldment of the sacred, which we have come to behold as earth, our celestial home. The artwork which I have created to accompany the telling of this creation mythos is not meant to be exact in its depiction, as I don't have the artistic skills to do so. My limitations are contained within the specific software available to me and my ability to work with it. However, I've attempted to display visually a basic essence of each of these stages in Earth's past as revealed to me through my inner plane's perception. Some of this art is a facsimile of my perception as to how the planet actually looked from space during these stages. Other pieces are more mythos-symbolic in nature, attempting to capture the spiritual consciousness of that time. Now, when I did this artwork, it was back in the 90s, so my software was even more primitive than it would be today. So we began with the understanding the universal tear. In the expansion of spirit into greater dimensions of experience, a sudden separation occurs in the light grid of this and several other universes, resulting in what Thoth refers to as the universal tear. As a result, two light spectrum grids are created, which could be seen in terms of sacred geometry as spirals. These are the full light metatronic spiral, undescended light, and the half-light orotronic spiral, descended or fallen light. Also, well, as it says, half-light. I have something blocking the screen that you can't see because it's part of my Zoom, so I'll see if I can read around it here. The universal tear exposes the central node where all energy ley lines of the universe conjoin, which Thoth calls the Eye of Ra. The star worlds forming the sacred trinity of Orion, Pleiades, and Sirius construct a high light energy pyramid to act as a capstone over the Eye of Ra, somewhat like a cosmic band-aid to keep the universe from self-destructing, and appointed the Sun Lords of Sirius as guardians of this structure, which is called the Telesakara. The Telesakara essentially recreates time event horizons that feed to and from the Eye of Ra. I'm sorry, let me read that again. That feed to and from the Eye of Ra, so that time fractures are not magnified and perpetuated throughout the entire universal grid. And so we go back to the Eye of Ra, the point where all this universe's ley lines converge. It is a pinpoint of leakage into and from the next universe. From the Eye of Ra, also called the Heliomar by Thoth, is emitted the pristine creation substance into this universe. The double dynamic of the eye is a blinking effect that is a flashing double diamond, responding to the quasar-like pulsing of the touching of the two universes. The Telesakara is a repository of the light mathematic harmonics for the hierarchical plan of Earth and its cosmic reality, which is positioned on the teleplane, linking various realities related to Earth's scroll or spiritual timeline progression. It forms synergic connections between various key energy points on the Earth. The Telesakara is the capstone over the universal tear, exposing the Eye of Ra. Okay, is this one going to be hidden? No, there, I can find it. Here we are. The Rana is the true flow of time in the universe. Now, when it's saying the true flow of time, it's not speaking of a timeline. It's a flow. It's like a river. Let's say you have a river, and in the river you have all these little lines. And those little lines are different timelines, but they're in one river, okay? The Rana is the true flow of time in this universe. The earth and other worlds are created as a path for karmic resolution to prevent certain forces from building within the sacred trinity of Pleiades, Sirius, and Orion, where the pure thresholds of light might become violated in time. These worlds, including the earth, are created within a parallel construct of the Rana time flow, but still aligned to it. Once the earth had been created, further karmic forces built, and eventually the earth fractures away from its parallel track within the Rana time flow, and the Kali rift is formed. This is actually a fracture in the Earth's time grid or flow that was created as a result of interdimensional implosions, which happened sequentially in a linear construct, but simultaneously in a true perspective of the sphere of time. In other words, as a result of sentient will pursuing its own course of action as a separate focus from that of the true time grid consciousness of the Rana time flow, certain occurrences came together in Earth's time construct as a synchronous event to cause a fracture of true time in our reality, thus creating the Kali rift. So the Kali rift is the gap that exists between our true time flow and where we currently reside in the continuum. Orion is the guardian of the gate. All worlds in this universe have realities in both the undescended full light of Metatron and the descended half-light of the Orotron. In the full light Metatronic spectrum, the constellation of Orion is the guardian of the gate, or the universal portal, a return to the full light universe. The beings from the full light matrix of the Orion star system act as a touchstone for light redemption. That is the return of the divine codes of evolutionized intelligence to the source. A gathering of Rigel, the blue star in Orion, human-like beings, called the Blue Fire Command, oversee the ongoing disparity of energetics that exist between the full light and half-light intelligences in the universe, and intervene in the name of the Metatronic or full light consciousness when appropriate. Hyperborean, pure light inscription. The earth is a highly luminous creation inside of its star sun. That's this. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start over. This is the first stage of the whole earth story, okay? So the first stage is called the Hyperborean, or the pure light inscription. Okay. The earth is a highly luminous creation inside of its star sun. In this era, it exists in the spectrum of full divine light, although it is already in a de-evolving universe created by the universal tear or separation from source. The Adam Kanmon template is delivered into the Hyperborean earth. The seraphim, angelics, usher souls into the earth of the Hyperbora. From the Adam Kadmon, a supra being called Adama, the 9 Adam Kadmon souls, is created. This being is an intelligence in a human-like form of high ordinance. It is in the image of the perfect template. All beings in the Hyperborean earth are amorphous and somewhat like jellyfish in form. In the first period of the Hyperborean existence, there's little visual difference between the high forms of plants, animals, and humans. But as Adama comes into prominence, souls then take upon themselves somewhat more physical mantles of being. This first race under Adama is known as the Solomons. Now, I worked with Thoth in trying to understand this whole concept. And so he chose terminology of Solomon and Nathan from something that Rudolf Steiner actually used to define the two Jesus souls. Generally, Thoth comes up with it totally his own terms. And then sometimes I bargain with him to use a term that's a little more understandable. But in this instance, I can't remember how Thoth and I, chose the Solomon and Nathan thing. I'm not a student of Rudolf Steiner's. I mean, I don't know his work a lot or anything like that. But I did know about the Solomon and Jesus soul thing because it related to what Thoth was talking about. And so somehow decided to use the Solomon and the Nathan in this perspective. Now, if I were to go back to it, I would want to use Osiris for the Solomon term. But it's too late to backtrack with my old material, so I'm not going to confuse things further by changing it in this regard. So we're going to go with Solomon here. So the first race under Adama is known as the Solomons. Now, one of the things I have to say, one more thing. Soul is sun. So I believe that Thoth kind of gravitated toward using it also because they're the solar beings, the Solomons. So that's another reasoning here that he, I think, shows that from the old Steiner material. To continue, the Hyperborean epoch is in the plane of pure manifestation through light inscription, where thought can create form directly. At this point, the Nephilim fallen lords begin their genetic manipulation. Okay, here we have the Anunnaki, which he's calling the Nephilimic fallen lords, begin their genetic manipulation, setting the stage for the angelic ones to then intermix with the Solomons. This divinely ordained interbreeding created an angelic human species, which Thoth calls the Nathana, and was conducted for the purpose of attempting to preserve the Metatronic full light orientation in the genetic earthbound humans. Okay, hold it. I think I misspoke by saying this is the Anunnaki, because apparently there was some genetic manipulation going on before the Anunnaki. Now, the Anunnaki are Nephilimic personages, beings, but I think this comes before the Anunnaki came to Earth looking for gold and blah, and all of that happened. This is part of an original stage or plan and was allowed to occur. Because humanity had already taken the step of separating itself from the divine inscription. As you can see, this is a very complex story, long before even the Anunnaki set foot on the planet and start doing what they do. So that's why I'm tiptoeing through it as well, trying to piece it all together from my old information and from the newer understanding of this whole Anunnaki thing. Now, I knew about the Anunnaki when I was writing all of this because Sitchin's work was already out there, but I hadn't extensively read up on it because Thoth wasn't pointing me in that direction, but I did know about it. But we can see that the Nephilimic influence came into play before the Anunnaki part. And the ultra beings of angelics would have allowed it because it actually served a purpose to help keep some full light spectrum energy within this separated humanity, which they separated themselves. They wanted to go down into this lower elementation. So this is where this part takes place. Okay, so where are we now? Okay, Sama. I want to make sure that I didn't skip anything. So just one moment. Oh, that was the Hyperborea. So right in the Hyperborea, we already had some gene splicing going on there. Okay, now we go to the Sama. Transubstantiation. Adama, as a 9-soul unit, breaks apart and the souls separate. The Earth now moves outside of its star sun. It enters a period known as the time of the mists, in which fine etheric substance that can be imbued into vaporous element is formed. This fine etheric substance is known as the azoth, and from this prima matra, or first matter, is created. And from this prima matra, or first matter, is created. Azoth is similar to a ether, but more electric in nature. Plant life now undergoes experience within pathways that open into an earthen-like sphere, which is not entirely corporeal, yet not of the cloud-like quality of the Hyperborean epoch. This earthen sphere is more like a density of tissue, which is malleable and elastic in nature. The Sama is a stage in which direct manifestation of thought still occurs, but with less consistency. Other pathways are beginning to form now also, through which less direct manifestational process can develop. Eros, substantiation. The Earth now receives atomic bonding. Matter and life, as we can comprehend it in a linear sense, begins. The more basic living consciousness, such as microbes, break away from the greater body of Gaia Earth Mind. While still linked at the electrical neural level, these basic forms create their own world within the greater world. Plants are still highly evolved Davic nature beings, yet they now find themselves becoming firmly rooted in the expanding physical matter plane of Earth. Direct manifestation from higher intelligence occurs much less frequently now. This form of creation is now reserved only for the Elohim, or master earth builders, and those souls who work under them who are the Eloha, highly evolved David beings who refuse to take lesser living forms, now create their own passage into the Earth's matter plane by combining their creative light in a dance of unity in order to design and inhabit the bodies of cetaceans, such as dolphins and whales. So this is a very betwixt and between period, because we're now receiving atomic bonding. Before then, we weren't. So whatever life form was in those previous eras did not have atomic bonding. It's like we can't even imagine that, but this is what this is talking about here. And of course, what was given to me was about the human beings, is that they actually originally, they were kind of floating with roots that were actually in some kind of a substantiation, some kind of a form, and then the roots started floating and moving from point to point, and then eventually the roots became the spinal column and everything, and they went into the human body and the legs formed, and then we have the human like we understand it being. So all of this is going on. I'm just giving, these are just little paragraphs. I mean, they're just touching upon what goes on in these periods. You know, we could take one of these and write, 5 volumes on it or more. Okay, so back to the next one is the Adama, cellular fire. As a result of the breaking apart of the supra being Adama, pause for just a moment here. Oh, that's so much better. I just realized that I could actually enlarge the print. I do have cataracts, and it's very difficult for me to read that tiny print. That's why I sound so stilted. So now I just enlarged it so I can see it better. So let's try this again. As a result of the breaking apart of the supra being Adama, a charge is sent through the time-space of Earth and is received as divine fire into the cells of the Nathana. The Solomons have now all now become Nathana through the interbreeding of angelics with the Solomon, as previously described, and they are now transformed into Adamic man through the release of this divine fire charge. Once the divine fire has been received by the Nathana souls, then all of the nature kingdom responds by sending the divine fire charge into the cells of all other living things. Before this occurrence, the genetic pathings and codes had been contained strictly in the divine light. At this point, the divine light becomes more engendered with a response to matter through fire, and the fire is contained within fields of matter. And these fields of matter are the morphogenetic fields of the cells in all living organisms. It is important to understand that previous to the receipt of divine fire at the levels of the cellular morphogenetic field of resonance, the cellular component contained a certain aspect of self-aware or I am consciousness, but the individual cells were not aware that they existed as singular manifestations of a whole. With the advent of the receipt of divine fire, each cell then became indelibly inscribed with the I am presence. The cetaceans embedded divine fire into their cells within the earlier period of the Eros epoch, but this was accomplished through the development of a separate entity from the rest of the Earth experience and is not a part of the I am individuation of the Earth as we know it. In other words, the Adama cell of consciousness was not part of this dynamic directly. This is a big wow, because this means that the cetaceans had first choice. In other words, they had their own developmental scale that went, as its own cell, its own manifestation, separate from the one we're in, along with the whole I am individuation of the Earth as we know it. So literally, we're living with ultra beings on this planet in the form of the cetaceans. Naidman, this is the time of separation. The orotronic half-light reality. Just one moment here. Yes, sorry. The orotronic half-light reality has taken over Earth at this point. The Adamic race is set aside by the divine hierarchy. They have broken with their inscriptions of light by attempting to create with their God-given powers outside the full patterning of light consciousness. Thus, the atoms are sent from the garden. Lesser evolutionary forms are then created from human genetics, such as the apes, and later the human-like species such as Cro-Magnon, etc. The Nephilim at this point enter the earth through direct physical incarnation and further genetically manipulate the sons and daughters of the Adamic race. The Nephilim create and then destroy a second Garden of Eden, created in a separate reality zone. Now here we do have the Anunnaki. However, you know the story that the Anunnaki just came to Earth to mine gold. This is not the whole picture, obviously. Let's read this again. The Nephilim at this point enter the Earth through direct physical incarnation. Now that is not some off-planet personages coming to Earth to mine gold. So they were already infiltrating the planet. And then we would have some of their kind coming physically from one planet to another to add to the habitation. So something else is going on here. And I don't have the whole picture to it. But one way or another, we have what is called the Anunnaki entering the scene. And I believe it comes in several stages, not just the gold miners. I think that was probably the last stage, and maybe the one that has the most memory in the texts of the Assyrians. Or maybe the first books that the Assyrians wrote about the Anunnaki before the gold miners has not yet been discovered. The Nephilim create and then destroy a second Garden of Eden, created in a separate reality zone. It is here that governmental structures come into existence to take place of take the place of alignment to the divine hierarchy, which has been lost. Entire kingdoms of separation evolved to develop an organizational matrix in which to define these separate paths. Lemuria and later Atlantis are examples of the early manifestations of such matrices, and thus become powers of human light and will more than the original divine light and will. So you almost see, you know, Lemuria and Atlantis were part of the Lotus, but they're also part of this. So there's a fracture here. Lemuria is in time broken apart by cataclysms. Then the Nephilimic wars take place. And next, the time crystal in Atlantis is incorrectly used, albeit with good intentions, to violate the pyramid temple in the city of the Lords, located within the Cydonia complex on Mars. The Earth's time tear, which we refer to as the Kali Rift, is then created, all of which ultimately destroys Atlantis as well. Now this paragraph, I mean, there's so much that takes place here. We could go into this. The Naidman alone could probably fill a library of books to understand all these different segments and how they fit together and don't fit together. But this is the time period that is really vast and overlapping many ages. Pythagoras, existing in the time tear. At this point, the Earth is existing in a fractured time zone. It then moves on a course of separate from its true pathing in time space contained in the Rana time flow. At the point of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the Earth is thrown fully into the Kali Rift, or separation from true course. We still exist within the Pythagoras. And the NEAAF is the new Earth star, return to the light inscription of Metatron. The ascension of the planet sometime after the year 2000 will carry us back into the true time zone of the Rana time flow, in which we will be received once again into the full light spectrum of the Metatron. These 7 Earth stages, epochs or zones, are divided further into 3 main parts. From the Hyperborean through the Adama epochs, the first 4 stages form what is known as the Atha, meaning time of the light. The second envelope begins with the Naidman and continues through Pythagoras, The envelope of the fifth and sixth stages is known as the Vela, meaning the time of fire within. This is the period when matter was engendered within the divine fire in the cells and subsequently separated from the full light of the Metatron. Now, this is an interesting point here, because when we were all engendered with the divine fire, well, I'm sorry, just a minute. When we were all in the full light of Metatron, there was no need for fire in the cells. The individual cells did not have a firing system. Well, we didn't have atomic bonding. See, when atomic bonding takes place, we're separated from the full light of the Metatron. So when we go back into the full light inscription, we leave atomic bonding behind. So you'd say, well, how can we see plants and trees and animals and birds in the sky, which we will see in the Nomasum stage of the new Earth, because we think that the only way we can have those things is through atomic bonding, but that's not the case. The third envelope begins with Merath, which is only the first stage in the New Earth star. The New Earth star is the greater envelope of Athanui, meaning the return to light. It is a redirection of the full spectrum of light inscription back into the full light spectrum of the Metatron. Now that's really just a big overview, and I mean a very brief overview of the Thoth record about the creation and the stages moving us into the New Earth star. I am going to include this little bit. It's a tag that I put into that that I included in 2006 or something, and it is the following. In the late 1960s, I received from my Akashic investigations, as well from my communion with Thoth, that the Earth and Venus did not originate in this solar system. I don't know why I'm saying the late 1960s. Because I didn't start conscious communication with Thoth till 1977. So I think what I mean is I originally received this information in the 1960s from the ultra beings, and then later in my communication with Thoth. I think that's the way it goes. Anyway, that the Earth and Venus did not originate in the solar system or even in this galaxy, but instead had been teleported from inside the star sun Rigel in the constellation of Orion to its current position around the sun of this galaxy solar system. Well, actually first within its sun and then around. This seemed so fantastic at the time that I rarely spoke or wrote about it. Now in 2005, this is when I'm including this, I read the book Cracking the Bible Code by Jeffrey Santinover, MD. In this book, Dr. Santinover is writing about quantum physics when he states, quote, there is genuine probability that the entire Earth will suddenly jump its current orbit around the sun to another star. It was further revealed to me that Venus was the guardian of Earth and that the more advanced consciousness spheres exist within stars rather than orbit around them. In recent years, quantum physics also has proven in a laboratory that two or more objects can occupy the same space at the same time. So this really follows suit with us returning to Rigel, having come from there and returning to there. Although we're not taking the rocks and the stones with us when we do this jump, we're turning into complete energy to do so, and some of it being left behind that can't match that energy frequency. So this concludes part 1 of the 2 gardens and the tree of life.